So today is all about autumn leaf texture. We're using a bit of mixed media, a bit of ink, a bit of watercolour, a bit of watercolour pencil, some different techniques just to show you how to negatively paint shapes, indent to create the leaves. So off we go. Okay, I've got some lovely autumn leaves that I've picked up on the way home from walking the kids to school, and I've placed them on the paper. So I'm showing you an easy way really to do a composition. You can draw around these leaves if you want to, or you can individually just draw them onto the paper, but it's quite nice to place them on and get a really nice composition. I want you to keep them for reference. I will pop a photograph up and a photograph of my drawing so you can screenshot those and print them off. So I've got a selection of leaves here. I'm going to do a little bit of mixed media. I'm going to start with some watercolour washes. So colours wise, I have got raw sienna, about a pea-sized blob, to half a teaspoon of water. I've got burnt sienna, I've got cobalt blue, and I've got cadmium red. I've also got a little bit of neat sepia. I'm going to be using some FW Daler-Rowney ink in here. This is indigo, and some sminky bronzing powder, which is really, really lovely. Okay, so get these colours mixed up. This is my raw sienna, just so you can see the consistency of these. Burnt sienna, pretty classic autumn colour. Cobalt blue. And cadmium red. So cadmium red's a little bit thick. It's a bit more, so it's come out of the tube. I'm just adding a bit more water to it. That's better. So I'm looking for a consistent mix of colours. I want them to be consistent. I'm just going to get another yellow in here. I need something a little bit warmer than the raw sienna. So I'm thinking gamboge. There we go. I've got gamboge hue here. So these are all Cotman colours today. And I've got that warmer yellow as well. So a nice selection there to start with. Okay, so I'm going to wet all of the paper. This is a Saunders Waterford paper. It's a cotton paper and it's rough. It's on a block. It's 12 by 9 inch block. So I've got plenty of water on there because I want to give myself plenty of time, because I've been playing with lots of different techniques. So I'm going to start with some raw sienna. I'm just going to start to bring that into some of these warmer leaves. I've got one that's a little bit fresher, the green one that's a bit fresher, that's coming down here. I'm also going to take some of this raw sienna into the background. So I'm using a round number 10. I'm just really dabbing this on. Then I'll come in with some of the Gamboge yellow. So I always start with my yellows, just so they keep nice and fresh. So I've got two leaves. I've got a greeny one and a greeny and reddy one that have got quite a lot of more warm yellow in. So I'm just going to get that in. And then just to create a synergy in the painting, I'm just going to take some of this through in other areas. So rinse my brush off, I've dabbed into the burnt sienna. So I'm just looking at which ones I've got the burnt sienna in. And we're going to go in with more after, so this is your base layer. I'll just take a little bit of that burnt sienna in here. And then I'm looking at the cadmium red. I don't mind if they blend over into the other leaves. Then I'm going to take a dab of this cobalt blue, a dab of the Gamboge yellow. I don't want the to be too blue on here straight away, so let's get the right leaf. So there's some green within here. So I'm just dabbing roughly where it is, and then I'm going to let that settle. You don't want to mix too much, you just want to dab and leave, because the more you mix, the more it'll blend into brown. I want to get these colours to stay put. And I'm going to drop down to a number 6 round. I'm just going to take in a little bit of the blue by itself. I'm just blending that a little bit. I can bring a few little bits into the background as well. We're sort of going semi-abstract with this one. It's lovely and loose. Just going to take a few dabs of red. I haven't got any in the background. It's blending nicely. Okay, then I'm going to get the sepia ink. No, it's not sepia, indigo ink. I use sepia a lot, that's why I say it. This is a very, very dark blue. I'm going to give it a good shake. I'm going to pipette some of it up and then squeeze it out back in, just so I make sure that I've got a really nice good mix, because sometimes it can settle a little bit. And then I'm just going to pipette some of that ink in. So what I'm doing is I'm gently squeezing as it hits the paper. No full-on squeeze, I'm not sending it everywhere. I'm just gently squeezing as it hits the paper. And what you get is these lovely run effects. And what I'm trying to create is some nice soft leaf edges by utilising the opaqueness of the ink. So the wetter the paper, the better this works. You can see it's doing those lovely spidery things, which are really nice. It's a really nice spidery effect. I've chosen indigo because it is of that phthalo pigment and it's a bit shooty, and I want it to do this. And the ink does this exceptionally well. It's a really, really nice effect. As a rule, I always say try and do some around the edges so it balances the picture. So I've got little bits around each leaf and then I've got some around the edges. And then this is the bronze powder. You can do it into your hand, or you can be very brave, sprinkle it from the lid or sprinkle it direct. Just going to add a little bit of bronze in places. I'm concentrating on the background because I'm actually going to paint into the leaves again. So if you pop this on the leaves now, what will happen is it will lift off when you come to wet the leaves again. So just concentrate on hitting some in the background. It's a really beautiful powder and it works really nicely with the ink. You get some really nice effects. As with all of these things, less is more. You can go a bit mad, but it tends to work better if you don't put too much on. Okay, I'm going to let that one dry off. Okay, so that's dried really nicely now. And we're going to start to look at each of these individual leaves. So I'm going to start with this one here, which has got a really nice base. We're going to come in and wet this leaf again. We have got some absolutely beautiful soft lines where the ink has come over, and the trick now is to not eliminate those and to keep some of them as they are. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the Gamboge yellow again. I'm coming up to this maple leaf that's in front, but I haven't wet that one. So I'm going to start to get this definition now. So I've pretty much taken the gamboge yellow all the way across with that was around number 10. I'm going to drop down to around number 6. Just mixing up a little bit more of that green, so that's the gamboge yellow and the cobalt blue. I'm just going to start to bring some of that in. The main area that I want to focus on is getting in around this maple leaf, because this is going to start to bring this out without me having to do too much. So there's a few little dabs of blue in there as well. Go back into the green. I'm just dabbing in just to give a variety of tone. Give that a little bit of a rinse. I'm also going to drop in a little bit of the burnt sienna, just in places. The ink will still show through because the colours are transparent, so it still works really well. Right, so I've rinsed my brush out and I'm dabbing into the neat sepia. So this is to get this nice dark happening within this edge. And it's going to bring out that maple leaf really well. Just going to dampen here. Now I've got a really nice soft edge and I don't really want to take any more paint in there, but I just want to just indicate the edge of that maple leaf. So just by wetting that, it's just enough to give it that nice soft edge. I'm going to do the same here. Pop a little bit of water and I can just pop in a little bit of that sepia, and that's just going to bring out the edge of that maple leaf. Okay, so tips of the trade. I have got a knitting needle. Whilst it is still wet, I can run this along and it will indent the paper and it will give enough of an indication that there are veins there without you actually having to paint them. If you don't get it when it's wet though, the paint doesn't run in and then you won't get the vein effect. So you must get it whilst it's wet. Knitting needle, fantastic tool. I use it for masking fluid as well. So I'm just it's like I'm drawing on the paper with a knitting needle. And hopefully you can see those appearing. The other thing I've got is a watercolour pencil. This one is, I have a selection of them. This is a Derwent graphite tint in aubergine. I've also got a bit of sandpaper. If I just scrape, you can get some really nice, you get lots of speckled texture. This is a good way of getting speckled texture on a leaf, right? So this is aubergine, so it's a purpley colour, but these graphite tint ones are quite muted, so they work quite nicely in any colour. And as long as it's hitting the wet paper, in fact I've got a bigger bit here, so I could take it on with the pencil itself and just dot those the bigger bits in. And they work quite nicely without me having to paint them on directly. It's all about getting a different process of application that makes them work so well. I've got the stem to do as well. So if I just take a little bit of the green. So this stem's running here. I'll run it off the page. Okay, so I'll pop that one out of the way and we'll have a go at this one, which is here. So I've got that base there again. going to wet it. I've got the beautiful runs of the ink again that will still show through. And this time I'm going to go with quite a yellowy green base. So this is a mixture of the gamboge with a little bit of the cobalt blue. So I'm going to show you a few different techniques. With mixed media, it's all about having a bit of fun and experimenting. So that was with my round number 10. I'm going to go back to my round number 6 now. The cadmium red is opaque, so against a transparent, when you're dropping this in, it will just push away. So it works really nicely. This is why I've chosen the cadmium red, because it is opaque. And it's going to work to push the transparent away. So you shouldn't get muddiness unless you really mix. If you just dab it in and let it do its thing, let the watercolour do its thing, you'll be fine. A lot of it is just having the confidence to just let the watercolour do its thing. Learning about what it does and then letting it do its thing. If you don't like the edge of one of the edges, just accentuate it a little bit. It's your painting, your choice. So I've just accentuated that edge a little bit because I didn't like it very much. I wanted it to be more pointy. And then I can flow down the stem because that's quite red. So I'm still using my round number 6. So I've got a couple of bits here where I've missed with water, so I'm just going to take a damp brush in just to blend those through. I've just dried off my brush, so I've dipped into a little bit of the sepia. And I'm just going to run that along this stem. Now I'm doing that because I can't see the stem very well and I want to see it. Then I've got some darker bits on some of these edges, so whilst it's damp I'm just dotting a bit in. So this is just the sepia, and I'm adding that in. So I'm going to do this one differently. I've got some clean film. I've got the battle of the clean film. So I just want a small bit. I'll probably save half of that. I don't want it to land on anything else, so get it about the right size. We're going for texture in this one. So we're going to do a little bit of a scrunch. That's going to build some texture on there. We're going to leave that one to dry. So I'm going to go to this one now, which is this darker one, because I think I can just about paint around without knocking the clean film. So this one has got a bit of an overlapping curly edge. So it's got a curly edge here. So we're going to leave that edge dry and then come back to do that later. That's the way you tackle a leaf like this. So I'm going to start with some water and then some burnt sienna. It's going to give me a nice base. I'm going to drop down to a number 6 to check it's clean. Pick into the Gamboge yellow. A few dabs of Gamboge yellow. And then I've got a few dabs of the green. Need to make sure that it's a different colour to the Gamboge yellow, so I'm just darkening that up a bit. Rinse my brush off, I'm going to come into the sepia. So I want nice crispy edges now. So I'm going to run the sepia. It's this neat sepia, there's hardly any water on my brush, but the paint's still really nice and wet. So I'm going to get these nice dark edges that are going to look nice and crispy because it's got somewhere to flow. Just remember, wherever you take your brush off, that's where the well will release and pop the paint in. So you don't want this paint to be too thick or too wet. If it's too wet and you've got too much water on the brush, you'll get a big explosion. It needs to be thin enough to flow. So you need a tiny amount of water, but not too wet that it's going to explode and go right the way across the leaf. So it's a real good one for you to practice that technique of taking this type of paint on and this consistency. See how that's just working really nicely. And then I can take little bits in to get that sort of crinkly effect. Just dabbing into the neat paint and blending through and following the lines of the veins, but not necessarily painting the veins. I just want it to look crinkly. I'm just going to flow a little bit of a stem there. And then to get those darker veins again, I'm going to use the knitting needle. I'm just going to draw those on. Just make sure you're following the shape of the leaf and you're curving round, that these aren't too straight. And then it's a bit like trees, you branch off with the veins, but don't do it at the same place. Alternate where you're coming off the main stem. And it tends to work better, looks more natural. And then there's quite a lot of texture in here, so I'm just going to use that aubergine again and just scrape it on the sandpaper. You can use an emery board as well, that's quite a useful thing to have in your kit. And that's going to give it a lot more texture. I'll pop some darker bits in directly with the pencil as well. Okay, I shall dry that off and then come back to you. Okay, so that's nicely dry and it's blown the cling film off that one, but you can see that this one's got some bits of texture on there. It's not worked as well as I would like it to have done, but it is random. The beauty of random is sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't work as well as you wish. But there is some texture there, so I'm going to go with it. All right, I'm going to have a look now at this leaf in the background. So I'm wetting this leaf again. I'm going to take some of the raw sienna on. So I'm using my round number 10. It's always nice if you've got a composition that overlaps a little bit because it gives a bit more interest. So this is an overlapping composition. It's working really nicely. I'm going to take a little bit of green on, so that's the Gamboge yellow and cobalt blue mixed together. Still got those colours showing underneath, which is fine. I'm going to get this on quickly, and then a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to then swap down to my number 6. Check that's clean, and I'm doing that same thing with the sepia, so a little bit on the brush, not too much water. I'm going to start to bring in some of the darker areas, some of the darker areas around the edges. So if you use the tip of the brush for the point of the brush, you can get some really nice edges to these leaves, especially where it's darker, just using that tip. I'm sweeping some through. I'm going to bring that stem down. Use whichever brush you're comfortable with. I'm still comfortable with my round number 6. So I'm just sweeping that through. I've gone underneath that other leaf. Now this one has curled a bit, but originally it hadn't curled that much. So I'll just try and bend it back so I can see the colour. And if I grab that knitting needle again, so it's perfect for these darker ones. Just pull that through, following the curve. Of the leaf. Just curve that. You get that really nice effect. I'll pick up that graphite tint pencil again. So I've got a nice dark bit just here. You can just paint these in. You can have a little bit of speckling as well if you want that there. As leaf sage, you do get this speckling coming on. Okay, if I pick up a rigger now, I'm going to come back into this leaf. I'm going to try a little bit of lifting out just to see if it works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. With the Saunders paper, it tends to soak in quite a lot. So what I'm hoping is I'm going to be able to lift out some lighter veins. So I'm just painting on with a little bit of water. And this is my long, thin rigger. The trick is to leave the water a few seconds, and you can also try to agitate the surface if you can. I'm just hoping it's going to be enough that we're going to be able to see these lighter veins. It's all about showing you different ways of doing things. So I've got a little bit of kitchen towel, different dab. You should be able to see that's just showing a lighter vein. If you go over them several times, you will find that it gets lighter and lighter. I'm just going to bring this main one through again, and this one. So I'm just trying to agitate the surface a little bit. It has got some really nice texture, but the texture is very subtle. Sometimes a clean film works and gives sharp texture, sometimes it's more subtle. It depends when you hit it, how wet it is. You can see those lighter bits now. And then with that same rigger, you could just make a slightly bluer mix. Sorry, just try not to come into the damp bit if you can. You can just bring out a few darker veins. From that central one. So you're just varying where you're coming off that central vein again. Curving with the leaf. And you can usually accentuate one side by running down the light vein. I'm just going to run down one side on each. Then that sort of pulls it all together. It's working really nicely. If you think it's a bit too obvious, then there's not many times that I tell you to block with kitchen towel. Snow and mottled leaves are 2 times that I'll tell you to just dab with kitchen towel, and it just stops it being one definite line and makes it work into that sort of mottled effect of the leaf. Okay, so we've got the edges, the curled edges of this leaf to do. So I'm going to wet those just with my round number 6, a little bit of water, and then it's just a little bit of sepia. I'm using that same consistency of sepia just along that edge. You're taking it on the bottom edge, but not the top edge. So you get that sort of light effect where it's curling over and the shadow. If it's not blended very well, just take a little bit more water in. And it's just enough for that to hold as that leaf is folding over. It's quite a nice effect. So we're going to have a little look at this leaf, which is the little maple leaf. I don't want to do too much this. It's knowing when to stop really. So this has got beautiful light and it's got beautiful tone. It just needs a tiny, tiny bit more definition. So the first thing that I'm going to do is a very fine stem. And then I'm going to bring in an edge here. So this is just with the cadmium red. And a bit of an edge here. Then if I flow a stem up, I'm not even going to do stems on the other two. I'm going to take my round number 6. It's damp, I've dabbed it off a little bit. And I'm just going to soften in this edge. By softening in, I mean I'm touching the paint, but wetting further than it needs to go. So it's just giving it a nice edge. I had no edge there, but I didn't want it to be an obvious edge and I didn't want to take away from the light of the leaf. So by softening in that edge there, I've now given this leaf a nice edge. I'm just going to flow that down there like that. Then if I just with a damp brush again, just touch into one side of each of those central veins, and that will just soften that into the leaf, and it's really nice and effective. So now it's just looking at the balance. I really like the composition. I like that this has got a nice balance to it. This one at the back is a little bit lost, so I'm just going to show you how we can get that to stand a bit more forward. So I've got a little bit of that indigo ink and I'm just going to pop it just lightly on the palette. Now I've got to be a little bit careful about where I'm going here because I don't want to lift up all that lovely bronze powder. So I'm going to come in to the edge here. I'm going to come in here. So I'm wetting an area. And then we're going to drop in some of this indigo ink. So it's just going to start to give a little bit more of an edge. But where that edge is, it's got all this room to soften in into the background. So this is what you would call negative painting, because I'm painting the background to bring out the object in the foreground. And then I'm starting to get much more of a sharp edge. If you go too far and that bit's not softened in, then it's just touching it with water. I'll bring a little bit in here. I'm using the ink because that's what I've used in the background and it's just a natural choice really, just to bring it together. But you could use a little bit of watercolour if you wanted. The trick is to not use too much of it. It's just to accentuate the leaf a little bit. If you go all the way around, it starts to look too obvious. We've got some beautiful soft lines and I want to keep those. So you can see that's softening in well. What it's done is just give that enough oomph to come forward a little bit. I'm I'm just going to do a little bit here because this leaf has gone a little bit wrong, and it's a way to cover that up. I think it's useful for you to understand where I've gone wrong. And I'm also going to pop a couple of little bits in here just to give it a bit more depth and balance in the centre. So I'm going to directly pipette just a little bit in. So I've dampened, and this is just giving it a bit more depth and balance in the centre there. So I'm going to take a bit of that ink there and just run this up here. I want to cover up that bodgy edge basically. As a professional artist and tutor, or you still make mistakes, what happens is you know how to correct those mistakes, and that's really the big difference, is understanding and knowing how to correct them. Any artist that comes along that tells you they don't make mistakes is very, very, very practiced at what they do. I think most of us are quite normal and accept that these mistakes sort of happen, and you are now seeing how I would fix them. So that bodgy edge is now gone with a bit of dark. This is just getting a little bit more balance at the bottom, just because it seemed a little bit light and it needed that depth within there. And what tends to happen is a painting evolves. As you're doing it, you're thinking, oh, that bit needs a bit more now. And that's exactly how it should be. With watercolour, you have to be that way. It has to evolve. You can't have a set idea of what you're doing and push through to get that, because you'll always be disappointed. You'll be disappointed because it just doesn't do all the time what it's supposed to do. But that's the beauty of the medium. The beauty of it is it does different things. And when you embrace it and you start to live with those different things it's doing, everything becomes a lot easier. So I'm popping a little bit just in here as well. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. So here we go, so that's all finished, and I've popped a mat round so you can see the finished effect. So there's a real variety of techniques and medias that we've used in there. So you've learnt a little bit about negative painting, a little bit about the techniques to actually indent the paper with a knitting needle to create the veins, lifting out some texture with clean film, some sprinkling with the sandpaper and the watercolour pencils. You can learn how to preserve the light in a leaf. We've got some ink and some sminky bronzing powder in the background as well to add more texture. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do like, subscribe and share. I'll pop you another video here, and I'll see you next time.